Today's presenter is Angela Prada with New Mexico State Cooperative Extension Office. She has worked as a cooperative extension agent for almost a decade now and really focuses on urban horticulture. So we're really lucky to have her. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes with Angela at the end of this presentation.
So again, I'm the extension agent in the north central part of the state, Los Alamos County, just northwest of Santa Fe. And going to talk to you today about fire smart landscaping in New Mexico for residential and municipal spaces. So we'll cover just a few things in this presentation. First of all, a little bit of fire history and forecast, just because it kind of sets the stage for our current conditions and where we're at, what we've been through, and where we're going. And then I'll move into a little bit about fire behavior, because I think that's important as homeowners and attendees to municipal spaces to understand just how fire moves and what we can do to mitigate those risks. And then I'll define some fire defensible space, which you can apply right to your spaces. We'll talk a little bit about insurance and legislation, because that's a hot topic. And I know folks are eager to know kind of what the forecast for that is as well. And then finally, I'll move into some landscape design and plants and go from there. All right, so starting off with a little bit of New Mexico fire history. Anybody who's been in the state for any number of years knows that we are not immune to wildfire. We are actually, New Mexico is ranked the 5th state in the country for most forested land. And so we've got just a prime stage for wildfire, no matter where you go. And on the screen on the bottom, you'll see just a list of a few key fires that I pulled to kind of highlight the activity going on in the last 25 years. Up in my area, I can think of 3 that I've been either close to or directly involved in, dating back to the year 2000 with the Cerro Grande fire. That one was not as large in scale as many of our more recent fires, but it was very significant in that it was in close proximity to Los Alamos National Lab. And it did burn over 235 structures, homes right in the town site. So it was definitely of significance. And then it did also damage some structures right on Leno property. So definitely concerning there. And then since then, we've had various fires. Las Conchas in 2011, again, close to Los Alamos National Lab property, over 150,000 acres. The Whitewater Baldy fire in Gila National Forest, I'm moving up the list here. Silver fire in 2013, quite large at 138,000, and then so on. Most recently, you all are probably familiar with the Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire in the northeastern section of the state. Taos, Mora, and San Miguel counties burned over 340,000 acres, just a huge wildfire, burning lots of structures in its path. And then our South Fork fire in Ruidoso last year, again, just lots of damage and destruction to communities and to people. Scientists predict that our New Mexico forests will die off over the next several decades due to ongoing tree decline and wildfire. And just something to think about, wildfire is driven by the right conditions, and we're in the midst of those right now, and that's persistent drought, strong winds, and then abundant dry vegetation. So here's a snapshot of just kind of historically our wildfire situations. Again, I just grabbed a few. There are so many that you can't fit all on one slide, but just to give you an overview of kind of what's been taking place. And you can see fires have been around a long time, where they're not going to go away anytime soon, just because when the conditions are right, forests are going to burn, and those fires are going to creep into our cities and our urban spaces as well. So it's definitely concerning and timely and discussing this topic. Moving back to New Mexico, our current situation, as of May 4th, we moved into stage 1 fire restrictions, and this includes the restriction or the prohibition of campfires and open fires in forested areas, except within developed recreation sites or improved sites. And that includes as well petroleum fueled stoves, lanterns, and heating devices as well. And then smoking is only allowed within developed recreation sites or an enclosed vehicle, and certainly not within a 3-foot diameter of any flammable material. And then the possession and use of any fireworks is prohibited across the state. So that's kind of where we're at now. I got this information off of the New Mexico Fire Info website, and that's just a site that's updated regularly and got all the latest conditions and fires burning currently in our state. Here is just a graphic of our current U.S. drought monitor. I obtained this image using the URL at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and this is our most recent our most updated version released on May 13th. And these are updated about every couple of weeks. So we can see here lots of drought. If we zoom into our New Mexico state here, you can see we've got a lot of red, certainly some orange and some yellow in the upper portions of the state. So we are definitely in ongoing drought conditions, and we're pretty hot and pretty dry. This is our seasonal drought outlook, again, obtained from the URL at the bottom of the screen. This is our forecast moving through the summer, released May 15th, and that'll carry us through, predicted through August 31st. So our hot summer months, they predict persistent drought with little to no change. This graphic here is our national fire risk. And I like to look at this image just because it provides a snapshot. It's provided by FEMA, and it highlights just the risk of damage to wildfire. And FEMA has stated that for every dollar spent on prevention saves approximately $4 in recovery costs. So they're always tracking where the risk areas are, and not only fire, but any kind of natural disaster. This image in particular highlights our natural disasters due to wildfire, and that's based on the risks are based on the community assets in the area. So that's property value or building value in dollars, your population numbers, and then your potential loss to agriculture because of fire. So you can see the western half of the United States is pretty red compared to the east side. And again, that's just because of the nature of how lands are used and the density of forests and dry vegetation in those areas. All right, so let's move into a little bit about fire and kind of what goes on and kind of what we need to be thinking about as homeowners and folks that are managing our spaces. 3 basic types here that I've gone on the screen. In the upper left-hand corner is going to be a surface fire. Those can be either low or high intensity, but they're generally on the ground, burning through debris and shrub. And then moving to the right-hand corner are crown fires, and those you'll see in your heavily forested areas, and that's fire that moves upward into your dry tree spaces. And these typically burn pretty hot, and they send out a lot of embers. So those are definitely concerning. So if you're living close to a forested area, these are definitely of concern. And then just an example of embers, in case you don't know, embers are the small little particles or debris that a fire sends out and that are carried by wind to help fire spread. And so these are all things we're going to talk about as far as how they affect your personal spaces. And so just a note here on the screen, I have just a note about ladder fuels, and that's something that we need to be kind of thinking about as we move into our urban spaces. And that's, in a sense, just understanding how fire might move from far away to close up. And you think about, ladders moving upward and across at the same time. And so if you've got the right environment and the right vegetation, et cetera, then that's going to help fires spread pretty quickly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue here. I have a slide here, just a little bit about fire science. I am in no way a fire expert, but these are things that are just kind of under the general umbrella of being good stewards of our environments. And so I think it's important for us to understand just a little bit about how fire moves and how that's going to affect our practices in our spaces. So first and foremost, factors that dictate fire behavior are typically weather, topography, and fuels. And our high temperatures and our wind are going to dry out our vegetation, very common in New Mexico and certainly in our forests at this point in time, because we just don't have the precipitation that we used to have. And so our trees and our lands are very, very dry. And then we get several high wind situations that also contribute to drying out our vegetation and then fuel the fires when they do spark. When considering topography, if you're in a mountainous area that's more rugged versus an urban situation, fire is going to travel a little bit differently in that it's going to move more quickly on your uphill slopes. And it's also going to burn hotter on your south and your southwest facing slopes because those are typically higher in temperature and less humid. And then again, in that kind of terrain, lots of canyons to get wind moving and to help fires spread more easily. Your fuels are going to be everything growing, dead or alive in the area, whether it's your landscape or it's nearby forests, any grasses, needles. Those are your fine fuels on the ground that are going to ignite really easily. And then again, just any kind of vegetation in the vicinity can be living or dead that can carry fire. Fire will only advance to locations that meet the requirements of combustion. And so we're going to go into that in the next slide, but you have to have the right conditions for it to take off and become a problem. But the good news is homeowners can influence the movement of fire. And we'll talk about that too. So just real quick, just some elements of combustion. It's just kind of an interesting way to think about it. Again, you have to have the right conditions, and those are having oxygen, heat, and fuel for fires to burn successfully and to spread. These are just some terms that I wanted to share with you. Radiation is heat energy that's released in all directions. So you think of a burning object and it's producing heat, and that heat is going to travel. It's going to radiate off of the fire, off of the object. And when we think of those forest fires, wildland fires, that heat is moving ahead of the fire, and that's what causes it to spread so quickly and easily. And then if you've got materials along the way that are combustible, it creates the right environment. Convection is the transfer of radiant heat to surfaces. So we think of embers lifting out of the flames and traveling to other places. And then finally, conduction is where you have direct contact with heat or flame on an object. And that's going to be another way that fuels can ignite. This here is a fire defensible space. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and go into kind of our mitigation practices. This is a poster that we created in our extension office that we have posted at our demonstration garden. We have about a half-acre space right in the center of town, actually, that our master gardeners maintain with different types of gardens and situations that highlight our sustainable practices here in the area and plants that grow well, etc. But we've got also a little storage shed, if you will, that was added to the demonstration garden to show defensible space. Fire defensible space. And so we've got this poster on one of the walls, and it shows the layout of the land and some of the practices that you want to keep in mind as you're thinking about fire defensible space. The graphic here is not of our space. That was taken from National Fire Protection Agency, but it's a really great graphic in that it breaks the space down into 3 obvious zones, if you will. And so on the poster here in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that what's called the immediate zone, or zone 1, and that's generally 0 to 5 feet around the home, around each of the points of the home. and a list of characteristics, which we'll go into in just a little bit. And then zone 2 is going to be in orange is going to be your fire defensible space. And that's going to be roughly 5 to 30 feet around the home or the structure. And again, just some key points for folks to keep in mind, we'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, the extended zone, which is roughly 30 to 100 feet from the structure. And also on the poster, we've listed some plant characteristics and ideals for plant selection, which we're going to go into more detail here in a little bit too. And then also some construction notes as far as what to consider on the actual structure to make your space a more fire defensible. So we'll just break it down into each zone here, and I'll just go over some of the key points. Either your immediate zone or zone 1, 0 to 5 feet from the house is the most vulnerable to embers. And if you think about fire that's gonna move from wherever it's moving from, it could be a neighbor's house that's on fire, it could be from a backyard, forested area, wherever it's coming from, it's going to ignite. Your home is going to ignite within that 5 feet surrounding the home. So that's kind of where you want to start. And you want to start right on the house, the actual structure, and ask yourself how ignitable is the structure. So here are just a few tips that I've put on the slide for you. You first of all want to remove all flammable material that collects in the rain gutters and the roof. I know over the winter, a lot of leaf litter can land in there, pine needles, things like that. And so you want to be sure and clean those out periodically and make sure you're not accumulating a lot of debris. You'll also want to inspect your chimney every year if you've got one. Not all houses have one, but if you've got one, inspect it annually at least, and then consider installing a spark arrestor, which with at least a 1/4 inch mesh screen, and that's gonna keep embers from landing actually or flying out from your fire in the home, but also sparks coming in. And then your roof should be Class A fire rated material, which includes asphalt shingles, a metal, or tile. And then if you've got shingles or tile, you want to keep up on the maintenance on those and just replace any that are missing or broken or torn, because that can be an exposed area where an ember could penetrate and get and land on the home and ignite a fire. And then any fences within 20 feet of the home should be non-combustible materials, just something to think about. And so as we move into the landscape, your tree canopies, if you've got trees close to the home, the canopy should be at least 10 feet from the roof and 15 feet from the chimney. Again, clear all vegetation around and combustible debris from around the perimeter of the home. So not just the gutter space above, but around the ground, underneath porches, steps, things like that, where the wind tends to blow things and they tend to collect. And then just keep in mind, as a general rule, you want to consider having a hardscape material in that 5-foot perimeter space. You want to avoid anything combustible like wood mulches and anything that might light. So we generally tend to think of those spaces as being sidewalks or gravel mulch. Any firewood piles that need to be readily available for you to burn in your home should be as far away from the home as possible and away from porches and decks and crawl spaces as well. And then also consider anything underneath those spaces. A lot of people like to kind of frame them out or screen them out so that nothing can blow down below, or even sometimes you get some weeds and grasses growing under there too. So just be mindful of those areas where debris and vegetation can collect. All right, moving into the intermediate zone, which is your fire defensible zone. Again, roughly 5 to 30 feet away from the home. The graphic here shows your ideal tree spacing, and as you get further away, as you start to think about plants that are in your living space, you want to be mindful of how close things are and how dense your area, your vegetation is. So your hardscapes and your driveways, which are often in place, or you may be considering putting those in place, Those are going to interrupt fire movement, which is good, and create those fire breaks, which you want. Your lawns and your grasses, you want to be sure and keep those well maintained with enough water and mowed to a height of 4 inches. Your trees and shrubs, they can be added to the landscape, but you want to consider keeping just a few small clusters of those and not too dense. You want to remove any vegetation under your trees. A lot of times you'll have a big, tall, mature tree with several either ground covers or shrubs and things underneath that tree. And so just keep in mind that that's just a channel for fire to move through the vegetation. So you want to clear all that out and just have your trees standing alone with nothing underneath. In your taller trees, you want to go ahead and prune out your branches anywhere from approximately 6 to 10 feet from the ground, but keeping in mind not to take more than a third of the overall height off of that tree. And then you want to consider having approximately or at least 18 feet of space between your crowns, your tree crowns, and more so, more space if you're on an increasing slope. Here are some examples that I took in my neighborhood. I live right in town, and so lots of neighbors with a lot of original landscape. These houses in my area were built somewhere in the 70s, and so at that time, conifers were either present on the land or folks integrated into the land. In the upper left-hand corner is just a house that shows, actually it's 2 homes side by side. I don't know if you can tell, but conifer trees placed right up against the house and with the canopies hovering well over the roof line. And so definitely a fire hazard there. And the same thing in the lower left-hand corner, just big, tall spruce trees. Those are quite popular, and we see them all across our county, those that are left anyway after our tussock moth problems. And just huge species in the landscape that are often placed directly in proximity to the home. The photo on the right is actually my next door neighbor. I live next door to this home, and there are 6 mature pine trees that are at least 80 feet tall, planted quite close together, and very heavy trees right in the front yard, very, very close to the home. And so I've got my eye on these trees and just making sure. So far they look healthy. I do see a little bit of maybe stress from drought starting to appear this season, but definitely a fire hazard right again close to my home. And then just real quick, we'll talk about that extended zone in your fire defensible space. This is 30 to 100 feet from the home, but can be up to 200 feet. So the goal in this space is not to eliminate the fire, much like zone 1 and zone 2, but to interrupt the spread and keep flames low into the ground. So here, again, you just want to remove dead vegetation, dried leaves, dried needles, pine needles, branches, things that tend to collect and fall from the trees. You want to go ahead and rake that up and get it cleaned out. And then again, remove excess shrubs that can help fire move from the ground upward. Low tree branches, same thing, to reduce those ladder fuels. That's what those are in reference to. And then any vegetation around buildings. Sometimes you'll have an outbuilding placed far away from the home, like a shed or a garage that's separate. And so in that case, you want to revert back to your zone 1 and zone 2 practices because you've got vegetation close to the structure. So you just want to be sure and keep those mitigation practices in mind. And then as you move further away from the home, your spacing can be a little closer with your tree canopies. It's recommended to obtain at least 12 feet, and then even further out, even 6 feet is acceptable for keeping fire reduced far away from the home. All right, so insurance companies, this may be something you've heard. I know I've heard a lot of conversations just here and there with people that I talk to, especially here up in Los Alamos. A handful of people have told me personally that their insurance company actually dropped them because we're considered a high risk area, high fire risk area. But on the flip side, many homeowners are still covered, and if you are still covered, those companies may be asking you to adopt some of these practices to ensure that you're compliant with their policy and with your local policy so that they can feel comfortable continuing to cover you. And so they may ask you to update your practices, and they may even require an on-site inspection to approve the policy or to continue the policy. They're going to ask you likely to enforce your local fire codes with your home, so to bring your home up to compliance with those codes. And they may refuse to insure you altogether. Like I said, I've had a handful of folks talk to me about that. And so just in general, fire risk increases with homes that are built adjacent to wildfire ecosystems, which is what we have in Los Alamos. A lot of places across the state, if you're close to those ecosystems, you're definitely high fire risk. Older homes that are often out of compliance with building codes, those are also high risk. And then as we continue through persistent drought and neglect, and if we have neglected landscapes, those increase our risk for fire. So these are all things that insurance companies are looking at and kind of adjusting their policies. This is a home and ignition checklist that I pulled off of the FireWise USA website, and this is one that is accessible to you as well. And I just thought it was a nice graphic of kind of a simplified list of some of the things that we've talked about today. If you're not in tune to thinking about these things, then you might want to start looking at some lists and see, okay, what do I have to do? What do I need to make sure is in place? Or my insurance company may actually provide one similar to this. So again, just to get us thinking about what our responsibilities are for mitigating fire risk. Our legislation is a popular topic with our fire legislation, I should say, has been a popular topic this year. Two bills in particular were active in legislation. Senate Bill 81 made it as far as the Senate, but it stopped there as far as I know. And so hopefully they'll continue that in the next year to come. But this is the New Mexico Property Insurance Program Association Board. So this is the establishment of a group of people or individuals that will oversee the FAIR Act plan, and that is the Fair Access to Insurance Requirements Plan, or Act. And this act requires or provides essential property insurance for individuals and businesses in high-risk areas that have in fact been denied for coverage by their provider. It provides $50 million in allocation for the administration of this FAIR Act and for fire mitigation programs. And most notably with this bill, the statutes affected are quite significant in that it raised the coverage limit for residential structures up to $750,000 and for commercial structures up to $2 million. So that's definitely a move in the right direction and something to be excited about. The second bill, Senate Bill 33, Senate Bill 33, our Wildfire Prepared Act was signed this year by the governor, April of 2025, and this bill establishes the framework and funding for improved fire resilience and structure and improvement of structure and properties. So the legislation on this bill will create two types of grants, one for funding for municipalities to modify structures, reduce fuels, and certify properties as wildfire prepared. And then the second is for homeowners to make the adjustments needed to bring their properties up to code and become more fire resilient. So pretty exciting stuff going on in our legislation, our state legislation. All right, so let's talk plants and landscapes. This is the fun part. Now we're out of the science part and into more of the fun part. So this is where we can talk about actuals. So essentially, our landscapes are the arrangement of the components that protect our structures from a fire defense perspective. If we think about it, most of our outdoor living is done within the 30 feet adjacent to the home. And so that's kind of the area we're going to focus on. Hardscaping is the non-living aspect of your landscape. So again, your driveway, sidewalks, mulches, indestructible mulches, etc. And your flammable outdoor items, including patio furniture, cushions, things like that, you often don't think about. Doormats, window boxes and planters, etc. These are all places where embers can take root and ignite a fire. So it's recommended that these items be stored in an enclosed area and not just in the general vicinity, especially in that first zone surrounding the home. As we know, fire moves very quickly through dry vegetation, so we want to keep our landscapes up. We want to water and maintain landscape plants as to the best of our ability. And then we also want to be aware of our ladder fuels. How is fire going to move from the outward in toward the home? So sensible landscape includes lots of islands, like we talked about, having groups of shrubbery or trees with essentially some open space surrounding, and even some hardscape is ideal if you're in town and that's feasible for you. A good way to think about it is that if your home doesn't ignite, it won't burn. And so your number one goal as a homeowner or steward of a structure is to maintain that space around so that it does not ignite. And your landscape plays a big part. Okay, so now moving into plants and their flammability, plants are actually characterized with an actual flammability rating. And typically that's from 0 to 10. You can see the graphic at the lower right-hand corner of the screen, where 0 is the most flammable, 10 is the least flammable. So they've kind of got it flipped in my mind. Should be the opposite, but 10 is actually less flammable. And so if we look at some of the characteristics that plants generally have that make them less or more flammable, on the left, in the left-hand column, are some characteristics that decrease flammability, and that's oil or resin content is typically low in those plants, and moisture is high. Plants often have a soap or a latex component or a pectin that's kind of like a waxy substrate that will inhibit fire, and so our less flammable plants have a higher content of those chemicals or products within the plant. They're generally compact in form in their growing structure, and they're generally green. Not always, but generally. And oftentimes they're drought tolerant, so natives are commonly less flammable, and slow growing plants are generally less flammable. And then comparing that to the column or the list on the right-hand side, just the opposite of that, these characteristics increase flammability. So low moisture, high oil. You think of our conifers and our forests; those are typically very, very high in oil and sap, and that burns very, very easily. Our more flammable plants are generally taller with a more open form, sometimes a finer structure, twiggy shape. And then generally our higher need plants are more flammable. So in general, just across the board, there aren't any fireproof plants per se, but we can mitigate our fire risk by using less flammable plants. And we'll talk some more about those here in the next couple slides. As a general rule, I thought this was an interesting fact that I came about. Plants that are generally more tolerant to our high salinity soils, which are statewide, certainly in our county, those are better able to resist fire. Okay, so here's a chart just showing kind of the general categories of plants that we see in a landscape, moving from most ignition resistant down to least ignition resistant. So we start with our green plants, succulents and ground covers, grasses. Those are generally more fire resistant. And then as we move down the list to our deciduous trees, ornamental grasses, and conifers, those two especially are very, very flammable and less resistant to fire. Here are some plants that I pulled just to kind of show you, just to kind of help you get a picture of what might be growing on your property and what's desirable, what's not desirable. And so in the upper portion of the slide, I've got four landscape grasses or perennial grasses that we often see, especially in the northern part of the state. And these are feathery reed grass, your big and little blue stem, and then your maiden grass. Those are quite common in landscapes in my area. And then some alternatives to those, which are less flammable, are your a little more native grasses. So your blue grama, your blue bunch wheatgrass, buffalo grass, and sheep fescue. Again, these are plants that require a little less water, more drought tolerant, and a little more native to our landscapes. Here are some examples of perennials and some options for those. We see a lot of Russian sage that kind of grows like a weed all across the state. That's very flammable, as well as yarrow. That's one that we commonly see in the landscape. So just a couple of alternatives to those are your low walker catmint plant. Looks very, very similar to Russian sage, but less flammable. And then your wild buckwheat looks a lot like yarrow, but again, just less flammable. Here are some shrubs. Common sagebrush, kind of wild sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata, compared to your Artemisia Powys Castle. Powys Castle is going to be less flammable, a little more attractive for the landscape, definitely an easy keeper and easy to grow. And then your juniper hedges, we see again just so many of those in our older homes because that was a plant that was desirable back in the day. And a mock orange may be an alternative to that. Could provide some cover and some flowers for aesthetic as well. A few more shrubs that we commonly see. Arborvitae is one that is quite common where I'm at. An alternative might be a fine line buckthorn, and then our creeping juniper, kind of a ground cover plant. An alternative to that might be a creeping sumac. Here is a plant list that I pulled off of the Idaho Firewise site, and I grabbed it because I think it's wonderful in that it provides so much information in just a single snapshot. You've got your plant name, common name, and scientific name, your water needs, sun needs, and then some plant characteristics as far as, I want to plant this, how tall is it going to get, what kind of flowers is it going to produce, does it grow in my area, etc. And then on the far right is a flammability rating. And you can see all of these plants. These are considered native low water flowering plants and ground covers. They're all at least an 8 in their fire flammability rating, which is ideal for our landscapes. So looking at this list, I see a lot of plants that are common to this area and common around the state of New Mexico. So just a really great reference here to help you in deciding what to plant and what might go well in your landscape. So here's just a continuation. Again, native low water trees, shrubs, and cacti in the upper portion of the slide, and then turf grasses there at the bottom portion. And again, just a lot of really great information, all very low flammability, flammable plants. Here are some non-native type plants, low water flowers and ground covers. And again, even though they're non-native, still see a lot of these in the landscape. Folks like to grow a lot of these plants just because they do well in our area, and especially in landscape situations where they're getting the care that they need. And then a continuation of that list. It's quite long, as you can see. Trees and shrubs there at the bottom. And finally, we'll just go ahead and wrap up. So just something to keep in mind, fires in our state will continue to burn because of our dense forests, ongoing drought, and then hotter temps and sporadic precipitation because of climate change. That's a pattern that we're in, and we're going to continue to see as we move forward. But hopefully I've showed for you today, you have lots of options for a beautiful fire-safe landscape, and also a responsibility to to maintain that defensible space, to reduce the potential fuel and ignition sources around your home and around your structures. We learned today that ladder fuels are the material that help fire spread, so that's key in our landscapes, key to determining what is planted and where, and as far as proximity from the home. We also learned that homes ignite because of those dry fuels adjacent to the structure. And by alternating the type, the size, the quantity, and spacing of our vegetation and the fuel surrounding our home will drastically reduce the likelihood of combustion and fire in our home. Keep in mind, our firefighters, they work hard to protect our residents, but ultimately it's our responsibility to protect the property and the investments from wildfire. And I think this is a timely discussion in that May is National Wildfire Awareness Month. And so I hope this information has been helpful to you and provides at least some food for thought and some resources for getting you started as far as developing your space into a fire defensible space. Thank you so much, and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. I'm going to put two resources in the chat. New Mexico State Forestry Division also developed a plant list for FireWise plants, so I'll put that in the chat. And then there's a website that's not related to New Mexico, but goes over a lot of the points that Angela talked about today for future reference, if you weren't able to capture all those notes. But with that, is there any questions? Folks, you're welcome to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. One question, Angela, is there a specific type of mulch that is safer to use in high fire risk areas?
So there are essentially two types of mulch that are available, and that's organic and non-organic. And so anything non-organic is going to be more fire resistant. And if you think about organic mulches, those are generally your wood products, your nutshells, what else? And things that were once living, so to speak. And so they generally will burn a lot more easily than your non-organic. Some people will use glass, rubber, but gravel honestly is your best bet, right close to the home.
There is a question in the chat. So on an earlier slide, you mentioned that forests are going to not exist in New Mexico in the future. Do you have any idea of what those forest stands will convert to?
That's a good question, and I think that's probably more directed towards someone who studies fire and so on. But if you look at the way land rejuvenate after a fire, for example, here in Los Alamos after the Cerro Grande fire, we had nothing but, well, not nothing, but we had mostly conifer and then some aspen and oak. And once that burned, the first thing to come up was the low-lying plants. So the oak is what grew first, and then the aspen. And then we're starting to see, so this is 25 years later, we're starting to see some of the conifers. And they're, if you were to drive up to the area that burned, they're, at this point in time, they're probably about 10 to 20 feet tall. So it's taken that long for them to germinate and grow to be even noticeable. Mm. But we did see the oak immediately within, well, probably not immediately, probably within a couple of years, we started to see small plants, and then certainly within 10 years, it was pretty dense.
Thoughts on mountain native mahogany?
Can you say that again, Megan?
Yes. So the resistance or any thoughts on mountain native mahogany?
Mountain mahogany is one that is, and just reading the literature, it's one that is more fire resistant. And so it is, because it's native, it's a low water plant, and it doesn't get super tall, which is nice. So it goes well in the landscape, at least in the living space or the defensible fire space zone. So that's one that we see. We have it in our demonstration garden. And yeah, that's certainly a good choice in my opinion.
Is there any more information on this demonstration garden? Is there like a website or photos that folks could look up?
Yeah, we do have a website. Let's see, I can post that in the chat. Although, well, we do have a plant database. Let me pull that up and see if I can get you the link.
While Angela's pulling that up, is there any other species you all are curious about or just general characteristics of plants that you'd like Angela to elaborate on more?
Okay, I went ahead and put that link to our demonstration garden in the chat. So that's available there. There are some parts of it that you have to have that are password protected, but I believe the plant list is not. So that should be available to the public.
And then another question in the chat is what advice do you have for communities that have an abundance of these non-firewise plants like juniper or pine?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and one that I is always forefront on my mind just because I live among homes like that. It's, people often call me out to their place to see their tree because it's declining or it's become problematic in some way. And so every chance I get, if there's a situation where I feel like a tree is too close, then I make that recommendation to them to consider removing it. It does come with an expense, and most people are not aware of how expensive it is to remove a large tree, especially a pine or a fir or a spruce. So yeah, if you can, again, you want to follow those practices and to remove any of those materials that are potential fire hazard that are close to the home.
Yeah, the biggest thing is breaking up, like Angela's mentioned, that continuity of fuels. Jim, go ahead. Yeah, feel free to chime in.
So this is Jim Casper. I live in Marin County in California, north of San Francisco. Just so everybody knows, and you may be aware of this, a law was passed in California in 2020 requiring nothing combustible in zone 0, that's 0 to 5 feet. That will be a requirement for existing homes as of probably the beginning of 2029. So if people want to get some idea of what's going on in California, you could be regarding zone 0 and the kinds of things that Angela was talking about, you might want to look at what's going on in California.
Yeah, that ordinance and that requirement is slowly moving to other states in the West and the Southwest. So New Mexico as a state is not there yet where we're requiring zero combustibles in the 0 to 5 foot zone, but a lot of trends tend to follow legislation and actions in California, especially in the wildfire space. So it definitely is something to be aware of. And it's just like Angela said, best practice for making sure that your home doesn't ignite. So good to follow that 0 to 5 foot free of combustibles and even succulents, if they're dry or anything like that, like those are still opportunities for fuel for the fire. And I saw a few of you put in the chat wanting slides. I have your guys' names down. I'll make sure I get you a copy of the slides for sure after this presentation. Any last questions or two? How firewise is rabbit brush? Chamisa.
That's a good question. I don't have a number rating for that. I'd have to look it up, honestly, but it is native. So just thinking off the top of my head, it is native. It is definitely low water. I know in places it can be dry just because it's generally not maintained. So if it's within the landscape and it's getting a little bit of water, then it's less likely, but I'd have to look up the actual flammability rating.
Hi, this is Amy Reeves. I live in Los Alamos also. Hi, Angela. I had a question about mulches because I see more and more people using rock mulch all over their yards and like under their big conifers, and all I think about is that holding residual heat and drying out those conifers even faster. How would you weigh the relative benefits to say like a rough wood mulch, like chopped up tree parts, like big pieces of chopped up tree parts versus rock in terms of the holding residual heat versus not being too flammable. I mean, I don't want to mulch with rock all over because I think it makes things too hot and I don't want to kill my trees. but I also don't want things to burn up. And I live in a zone that was directly affected by the Cerro Grande fire. So
Great question, Amy. So that's one I get often, and it's always it's always kind of a catch-22, and you're absolutely right in that organic mulches are better. They're better for the ground, but keep in mind that rock mulches are not terrible. They they don't supply the nutrients that organic mulches do, and so when you put like a you know when you put wood products or things like that that break down over time, what that does is not only it holds the moisture and regulates the soil temperature, but it also adds organic material back into the soil as it breaks down over time. So that's ideal. But if you're if you want to improve your fire mitigation practices, rock is definitely an option. In that, I don't know if you've ever if you've ever dug up anything that's been sustained under a rock mulch. It is quite wet under there, and I'm always surprised because I think the same thing. It's just hot and dry because that heat is just it's actually radiating off of the gravel versus going into the soil. So it's probably not as protective in regulating, keeping your temperatures as cool, but it's still providing a definite barrier against the elements of just the exposed environment. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I was just actually more concerned about the extra heat radiating off the rock that dries everything nearby out faster.
Yeah, and the point that we're trying to make here is that your landscape does not have to be completely xeric, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to remove your plants and put rock down in order to be fire sensible or compliant, with our fire defensible space. You can still have plenty of greenery in your landscape, but in certain areas, especially those close to the home, you want to have those non-combustible materials, and that's 0 to 5 feet in isn't much.
No,
We're usually walking in those spaces anyway, not always. Sometimes they're planted, but yeah, I mean, those are the spaces that we're moving around in. But if you think about the spaces that we're actually, you know, entertaining or spending time outside, those are going to be your spaces that are a little more planted, right? And so, yeah, it does not need to be void of greenery to be fire defensible.
thank you.
Sure.
We're nearing the top of the hour, but I see Jim with his hand up, so we'll go for one last question. Jim.
Not a question, just a comment. I put in a link to a mulch study that was done about 18 years ago. And just to add to what Angela mentioned, if you use compost, which essentially has been deteriorated enough to be less flammable, that could be a substitute for what you think of as mulch, of wood mulch, and maybe a substitute in lieu of rock mulch.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you so much, Angela, for donating your time to share all of these wise pieces of wisdom and examples with the group today. And for those of you who put in the chat, I will definitely get you those slides within the next week. And also the video that was recorded will be posted on our YouTube page and on the FACNM website. And please feel free to visit the FACNM website for other resources related to becoming a fire adapted community. So thank you all. And thank you again, Angela, and hope to see you all in the next webinar.
Very good. Thank you, Megan. Thank you for hosting.